Welcome back to the Light and Life podcast, conversations on faith and life in downtown Colorado Springs. I'm your host, Liza, and I'm here again with Pastor Tim.
Hey, Liza.
Hey, how's it going?
We're in downtown Colorado Springs.
Yeah, whoop, whoop.
Whoop, whoop.
And last time we talked a little bit about poverty and homelessness and wanting it to be kind of a little 2-episode part series. Last time we focused a little more on homelessness. So today we wanted to tackle poverty a little bit more. And speaking of, before this episode started, we were talking a little bit about how many shoes I had. And I know poverty isn't always monetary, but I'm very materialistic. And so that's one of my downfalls. But I like to think it's a good thing because I do feel fabulous. So
nice. Is there a number coming? Or is it too big?
It's pretty big. I have a whole wall of shoes attached to my door and a shoe rack. It's a problem. People comment on it every time they come over. So I'm working on getting rid of those. But Tim has a really funny story about shoes that
do you look at some of them and feel bad for them that they never...
Okay, yes. Okay. Some of them are sad. I've had them for... Some of them are sad. And I always buy running shoes, for example. Yeah. I always buy a new pair, when I've outrun, when they get really beaten up, but I keep them for whatever reason, just in case. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that in case is at all. I don't know what's going to happen to where I'd need my really old pair of shoes with a ton of holes in them that give me blisters. But I keep them just in case. Yep. But Tim, some comedic relief here. About 3 years ago, you told me a story about someone who came up to you after one of your sermons.
Yeah, I guess there's a thing about so I'm actually pretty simple about shoes. And I think I was wearing the shoes that the Army issued me for a long time. And I just have been pretty simple about shoes. Mm-hmm. I
can't relate at all.
But when I got here, I was wearing brown shoes a lot to lead in worship. And so I had my robe and my brown shoes sticking out of the bottom of them. And I guess that was a thing because I was, this was back before we changed the worship times to where I couldn't do this anymore. But I was back at the back door shaking everybody's hand and and this sweet lady came up and shook my hand, looked me in the eye and just said, "That was really wonderful. So glad you're here. And I like your brown shoes." And that was the tone.
As if a lot of people didn't like your brown shoes.
There must have been an entire conversation happening somewhere where people were splitting into teams.
Yeah, I remember being on a team, actually.
Were you on a team? Which team?
Just kidding. The whole congregation has a secret private Facebook group about your shoes.
My shoes?
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. But...
Well, there's also a thing about matching your shoes to your belt, which is just something that I'm never going to succeed at.
Really?
And I've had that come up too. It's a really big problem if your shoes don't match your belt.
Well, have you ever ventured to ditch the belt? Because that's a thing these days. No belt.
No.
No?
Because that would be bad.
You think?
I think so. Yeah.
I'm pro non-belt sometimes. I'm wearing one today, so I feel like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. But that's an option. That's always an option. If you're fearful of it, I'm here to help.
Well, this actually kind of fits. Last time we were sort of bumbling a bit. I felt like I was just trying to lay out, because it is a really confusing landscape. You were asking about what's my responsibility toward the poor. What do we do as Christians when we see someone panhandling or homeless on the streets? And so we talked a bit about that. We talked about the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. So hopefully we can kind of, you want to talk more systematically, like poverty as a global or systematic problem. What are some things that we can do? So I've got a couple ideas, I think.
Okay. Take us to the promised land, Tim. Okay. We talked about the Good Samaritan parable in Luke 10, and I know that's kind of still where we need to be. Piggybacking on that, if we're in a place to help, what do you say is the route to go there? Yeah.
So when you think of poverty, so we start with this whole idea that we're as Christians, we're gonna be called to love God, love neighbor. So it's that vertical, horizontal, and and the hope is that any one of us can look back on the past year or a past sort of season of time and say, okay, I've grown in loving God and loving neighbor. And then you say, well, what do you mean? And you can point to something. I'm deeper in, I have a deeper passion towards Jesus. I'm more open toward the things of God and trusting the things of God because I love God. And I feel like my love for God is growing. How about neighbor? How are you growing in your love for neighbor? What are the signs? What are the things that you look at that say, okay, I'm growing in my love of neighbor? And we definitely know that in reading the scriptures that our responses to the least of these, our responses to those who are in need, who are around us and are in pain or hurting, that's absolutely part of what we need to be growing in. So the parable of the Good Samaritan was what we looked at, and part of what we emphasized last time is that if you are in a place to help, then sometimes being a neighbor is activating in your own accord, helping someone on your own donkey, helping someone to your own wine and oil. I'm referring back to the story of Luke 10 where the Good Samaritan put the person who had been beaten on his own donkey, and he applied oil and wine to his wounds, and those were all sort of personal things, like pretty intimate. But the most important thing was to get that person to an agency of care where they can actually not just feel better as they're sort of in their woundedness, but they can actually heal over time, which Jesus referred to as the N. And I didn't say this last time, but then at the very end of that story, the Samaritan says, and I'm going to come back and check, and if there's anything else you need, I want to respond to meet those needs. So the responsibility doesn't sort of go away once he says, okay, check in at the end, and now I don't care. He still cares, the responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so that's that love of neighbor that's actually responsible, that you can say, I have relative confidence that I've helped. So
I love what you said, too, about just love being active.
Yeah, love is activating. It's being active. Yeah.
Right. How would you define love?
Well, Liza, no, it is true. It is, it's a huge category in the scriptures, and obviously it's what Jesus calls us to do as the greatest commandment: love God, love neighbor. So what is love? And love is a sentiment. It is an emotion. It is something that we feel within. But more often, Jesus talks about love as action, as activity. Yeah. So the way Jesus loves us is he doesn't love us because he's getting something out of it. He loves us in a way that builds us up and makes us better, makes us more whole, makes us ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so when Jesus says, now go love others as I have loved you, that's what he's talking about. Like, go, if you're going to love somebody, you're going to love them up into a greater humanity, up into a greater self. Yeah. You're going to love them forward into a better life, you hope. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense, because one of the definitions of love to me is desiring the good of another over yourself. And when you're saying that's what Jesus is doing.
Yeah, right.
He's loving us in effort to build us up, and that, in essence, is the kind of behavior that we should reflect to everyone to bring them closer to Jesus too.
Yeah, and it does.
Am I on par there? Or?
Oh, yeah. So you're trying to build someone, you're trying to give yourself away to someone when you love them in a way that builds them up, not a way that consumes them or expects something in return from them. So, all right. So now sometime we're going to do like the Valentine's Day episode. And we're going to All right. So poverty.
You said, Liza.
Well, Liza. So poverty. So the Bible talks about having the poor. The Bible talks about, and a lot of people talk about, does God have a preference for the poor? Is there a divine preference for the poor? Because God just talks about caring for the poor so much. And then the other end, Jesus talks about how being rich is really dangerous. Mm-hmm. How being rich can sort of capture your heart. You can't worship God in mammon, the God of money. And it's easier Jesus said, for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle than to come into the kingdom of heaven. And his disciples were like, well, I thought the rich people were the blessed people who are closer to God. And Jesus was like, no, you've got a lot of problems if you're rich. There's a lot of temptation. So the first thing to say when we're talking about poverty is that the truth is that we are the rich. We are the ones who are in the danger zone when Jesus is talking about if you're rich, you've got to watch your heart. So what do I mean by that? So this is a little bit of statisticos. We're, by the way, not trying to be experts on this podcast.
No, I think we've made that clear. I am
I think we've
drinking
made that clear.
Diet Coke in a coffee cup
Yes.
for the aesthetic, guys.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at
That's
right
sort
now.
of the zone.
Yeah.
So these are statistics that, we're not trying to be experts here, but these are things that do get batted around, and these come up in conversation, but I've mentioned this before in a sermon. So according to World Bank, if you earn $2,000 a year, you're in the top 50% globally. So just think about that. $2,000 a year, 50% of the global population earns less than that. An income of $32,000 a year places you, what do you want to guess? Don't look at the notes.
I don't want to guess because it makes me feel bad about my shoe wall.
Your shoe wall?
Yeah.
So it's the top 1%, 32,000. Globally, you're in the top 1% according to the World Bank. A net worth of $90,000 puts you in the top 10% of wealth on the planet. So we are the wealthy, and this ministry called World Vision just sort of tries to put this, really easily for Christians to understand when we think, I'm not wealthy, I'm not rich. And they say, do you have more than one pair of shoes? Liza, do you have more than one pair of shoes? Do you have
yes.
Do you have a choice of do you have a choice of what to eat for each meal? Do you have a choice of what to eat for each meal? Most of us are like, yeah, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you're probably saying, yeah. Do you have your own means of transportation? And I love the last one. Do you have more than one set of underwear? And they say, if you do, you're in the top 10% of wealth in the world.
Golly, I mean, that puts things into perspective for me in a way that is just kind of hard to fathom. $2,000 a year, you're in the top 50%. That to me is like, I don't know that I could live on that in a month, personally. Like that, and I know that sounds bad or like Liza wake up type thing.
Yeah.
But it does give me a flashback to when I was a kid. I remember Christmas. One Christmas, my mom made me go around and individually count every single light fixture in our house.
Wow.
And I remember being annoyed about it because that's just what life was to me.
Right.
And I had never seen any different than that.
Right.
This is normal. Everyone has lights in their house. Like, I'm not any better than any of my friends. And it was a practice of, thankfulness for what you had. But it's because I had never actually been exposed to those things. So now, in retrospect, I'm super thankful for that experience because I remember being like, oh my gosh, there are so many freaking light fixtures. Who would have thought?
Right.
Like even in your bathroom, there's like
or
whatever.
You see how many bulbs are in in the bathroom, even one bathroom.
But yeah, I had only known fiscal safety in terms of the little things that you'd said, shoes, choice of what to eat, means of transportation. And there's been times, like in college or, where you feel like money's tight, but it doesn't even kind of equate to
that as a lifestyle.
And
so there's ministries that like Compassion has decided we're only going to work. There's plenty of poverty around the world. Compassion has decided, no, we're going to focus on people who are living on less than $2 a day. So that says like draw that line. And you know what? They've got plenty of people to work with. I mean, the amount of people who are living on less than $2 a day just fills the globe. So, in our notes, I just shared with Liza and the team here about the global wealth pyramid, which you can just Google that. I mean, you can just Google the global wealth pyramid, but you see when you look at that how it sort of how wealth breaks down in the world, and what you've got is like at the top of the pyramid when you talk about the top 8% of the global wealth pyramid is in charge of 86% of the world's wealth. So 8%, 80% of the wealth, just put it that way. And then the next group down is people who have between $10,000 and $100,000 in US dollars. And that's like 11% of the globe. And so then you get down to the bottom half, and 73.2% of the population of the earth are in charge of 2.4% of the wealth. So 73% are people who have less than $10,000 to their name. And again, there's a lot of people who live until. So why do we say that? I mean, there's when you go to the Bible and you have these debates, like does God have a preference for the poor? Is there a divine preference for the poor? Does God care more about the poor? I mean, God cares about rich people too. I mean, He cares about us. He cares about. We've already said we're part of the wealthy class here. If you're listening to this podcast, odds are you're up towards the top of that pyramid in one way or another. And God cares about you. God doesn't say, "Oh, because you're not in poverty, I don't love you." But I just think it's fine to say there's a divine preference toward the poor, just in the sense that God cares about people, and most people, 75% of the population of the world, have total wealth under $10,000. So it's not just sort of like God cares about certain types of people in certain types of situations, but God just cares about people, and most of them are dealing with a pretty small amount of resources.
That just blows my mind, actually. And I think, I talked about this on our last episode. There's a lot of shame.
Yeah. And it's not that,
around,
guilt can be a wonderful tool.
Totally.
For parenting.
Totally. Yeah.
No, guilt and shame is not the goal, right?
Yeah.
So what do we do? How do we respond? So I'm going to just kind of power through a couple things. I do want to say this too, and maybe we'll jump to this. Like, it's really interesting how people who don't have a lot of resources talk about poverty. So because you worked with my wife Abigail in her ministry that called TOLI, Touch of Love International, that does microloans to alleviate poverty in 5 different countries around the world. Mm-hmm. They do small business training and small loans. It was founded by the founder who's here in our church, Eddie Yasa, and it just has been doing great work to alleviate poverty. There's another ministry like that called Hope International, and they're actually a lot bigger than TOLI, and they've gone around and done some surveys, and they've asked their clients, their people who are living on less than $2 a day, what is poverty? Now, here are their top 10 answers. Number 1, poverty is an empty heart. Poverty is an empty heart. Number 2, poverty is not knowing your abilities and strengths. Number 3, not being able to make progress. Think about so you ask someone, what is poverty? Here you are living on $2 a day in sub-Saharan Africa. What is poverty? And they say, not being able to make progress.
That makes my heart sink.
Yeah, I know. Like feeling stuck.
It's very cyclical.
Yeah. Like, how can my kids are going to be...
How do I get out of this? Yeah.
How do I get out of this? My kids are going to be just as bad off as I am. Number 4, isolation. Number 5, no hope or belief in yourself, knowing you can't take care of your family. Number 6, broken relationships. So you ask someone, what is poverty? They say broken relationships. Number 7 answer, not knowing God. Number 8, not having basic things to eat, not having money. Number 9, poverty is the consequence of not sharing. Number 10, poverty is a lack of good thoughts. Do you have any thoughts about that list? Does that surprise you? Like you go and ask people who are in what we would call abject poverty, and you say, what is poverty? This is what they say.
The one that really actually sticks out to me, just based on my inherent thoughts, or my, what is it when you have intrusive thoughts?
Intrusive thoughts.
Intrusive thoughts.
Okay.
A consequence of not sharing.
Yeah, right.
That to me, it just makes me pause and think, because I guess it's around the same sentiment of what goes around comes around. I mean, would you agree that that's kind of what they mean, or is this just solely what we've read?
Well, I think what I would read into that answer from a Christian perspective, God has included everything in the world that we need to live for His glory. And so if someone's in poverty, that means that there has been a problem of not sharing, which I think is really insightful. I think what's interesting is...
Across the board.
Yeah.
You don't mean it's individual.
Yeah, it's not like that guy didn't share with me.
So he's struggling now.
He's the problem with poverty. But
okay. So I must have read that wrong.
Okay.
Okay, I'm glad you...
But that there's this problem of not sharing the resources that God has given us, and that's what poverty is. What's really interesting about that list is just writing a check for $500 does not fix these things. Like It's so much deeper than that. So in the interest of time, since we've already spent 2 episodes on this,
Yeah.
But we've talked about some things to do. I mean, let me just say, how do we respond? We have lots of opportunities. The first one you've mentioned is tithe and live generously, like giving away, supporting good ministries and agencies that you trust, like the Good Samaritan who said, I'm going to take you to a place that I know. I'm going to take you to an inn. And then staying engaged, how the Good Samaritan said, let me know how it goes, and I'll support what you need after that. Getting involved in poverty and hunger relief efforts in your city. I want to say in Colorado Springs, go to Crossfire, go to Springs Rescue Mission, go to Solid Rock Community Development. Until you go and see it, it's not really something that you can even sort of fathom. And you want to make sure that wherever you're involved in giving, it's not enabling poverty, but it's combating it. Because poverty is more than just money, like these people have said. It's so many other things. So here are. You talked about like going on when you first went and saw
a mission trip,
a mission trip. What did that do?
I had always heard about impoverished countries. I think. I grew up in a small Catholic school where the biggest eye-opening world event to me was that earthquake in Haiti that just shattered families and homes, and you would see it on the news, and it's just so far removed from my small bubble reality that I kind of, I guess, just compartmentalized it in my brain as a child. And then come college, I went there and I worked in an orphanage, and just the streets are lined with sewage, and there's livestock just out and about on the streets, and they treat dogs as pets. Even something as small as that, or as pests, not as pets. Yes. Yeah. Something as small as that is just a stark difference to it made me grateful for what I had. But again, I had that weird...
First time Abigail and I were in Kenya, we stayed in somebody's house, and they kept their cow in their house with them.
Wow.
And so I said, what did you name the cow? And the guy was like, no. Like...
Don't ask me. We wouldn't name...
You don't name a cow. Like a cow
cow's a cow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying like his name is super secret. Hush, hush.
Yeah, hush, hush. I'm not going to tell you. That's my password. I'm not going to tell you the name of my cow. No, just different. It's a different world, and I I mean, I really do. I mean, you listeners, if you've got an opportunity, come on one of our mission trips with First Pres, get out there, see some things, because honestly, we go and travel places on vacation. I'm very excited because we're going to take our younger two very soon to Kenya to stay with some friends of ours who work with the orphans there. And I just want them to see, I mean, they've been places, but they haven't been places not on vacation. They haven't been to life in the developing world. So I just think that's important. So
something that you do have listed here is to consider the disciplines of Sabbath and simplicity.
Okay, yeah, let's get to that. All right. So here's 4 more things to think about doing.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Wait, should we?
Okay. So no, it's
that.
okay. No, that's good. So
Okay.
number 1, we kind of talked about this, but be careful
Yeah.
about enabling homelessness through direct gifts. Participate in supporting healthy systems instead. But don't let that be an excuse to get hard-hearted. So we've really talked about that. Okay. Number 2, tithe and live generously, support good ministries. We talked about that. I'm repeating myself. Number 3, get near, get close, volunteer time, get to know someone. And that's what we were just talking about. Like, go on a mission trip, go over to Crossfire, go down to Springs Rescue. They love volunteers. Just do it once. I mean, the cool thing is go on City Serve weekend and just go for that morning, because one of the reasons why we set that up was that we wanted people to have a chance to just go and not feel like, ooh, if I go once, they're going to expect me to go every week for the rest of my life. No, just go experience it, see it, and see if God moves something. But this is the surprising one. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It's what I just...
This is really, I think this is surprising. We're going to have to dig into this in a bigger way sometime. But here it is. Consider the disciplines of Sabbath and simplicity. So we're going to have to go back to that another time, but real quick, we remember that the Hebrews, the people of God, were slaves in Egypt. When you're a slave, you work every day, you never stop. When God gave them the 4th commandment, and they were like, commandment number 1, okay, God is my only God. Number 2, don't make an idol. Okay, don't make an idol. Number 3, don't use God's name in vain. Okay, I'm going to remember that. Don't use God's. And then God was like, number 4, on the 7th day, rest all day long. They're like, got it. You know, that was a gift. Like, I've been a slave. Sabbath was a gift, and we've done away with that in our modern world, in our contemporary world. Mm-hmm. But think about that. If you stop, and the Bible goes on and on about this, like not just you, but the people who serve you Sabbath, the ground rests, the Sabbath rests, your creatures, your animals, your cow rests, everything rests. And because we don't rest, you know, when you want something on Sunday because you're not resting, you're not stopping, you're not practicing Sabbath, it makes other people work. Like everywhere except Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby.
Yeah.
And you're making them work because you're not resting. So honestly, the discipline of Sabbath is a Christian discipline to address the social injustice of poverty. And the other one is simplicity. We actually live on a lot of cheap labor around the world. Honestly, it's enslaved labor. And so we've got to ask ourselves as Christians, do we need so much stuff for so cheap? We should be thoughtful about it. So that's big topic, and just off the cuff, that's a start of how do Christians address a responsible view of poverty, I think.
Mm-hmm. And we could talk hours and hours about this, but I do think that about wraps up our time. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Tim, for the great conversation and insight. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to join us next time on the Light and Life podcast, and we'll dive into more.